More on that breaking news from the State Department. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is postponing his trip to Ukraine to monitor the situation in Iraq, he says. All right, joining me now is Colorado Senator and Democratic candidate for president, Michael Bennet. No relation, by the way. Senator, it's good to see you.
It's nice to see you, my cousin, although you spell your name correctly. I spell mine
Uncle
with
Mike.
Just one T. So, yeah.
All right. It's great to have you here. Let's get down to business. So to you as well. So what's your reaction to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo postponing this trip to Ukraine, which a lot of people said he shouldn't be taking in the first place?
Well, I guess that it's really important that we make sure that the people in our embassy continue to be safe in Baghdad, and that ought to be our #1 priority at the moment. I think it's very unfortunate that, you know, we're once again not showing the flag in Ukraine when over and over and over again we've sent a message that Russia's interests are somehow more important than Ukraine's interests. And I guess the other thing that I'd point out about Iraq is, you know, this is an inevitable outcome of having a president who has no foreign policy strategy and who's weak. Last week and the week before, the protests in Iraq and Baghdad were all about kicking Iran out of Iraq. And now, in this turn of events, we now have the Prime Minister agreeing that he's going to support legislation to kick the United States out of Iraq. You know, the president is reckless.
And yet you have the spokesperson for the State Department who said today that U.S. policy in Iran, as she put it, is stronger than ever.
That's preposterous. When Donald Trump became president, Iran was a year from being able to break out to a nuclear weapon as a result of the Iran nuclear deal, which for once was an effort by our country to manage a situation in the Middle East instead of to go to war with it. Because he backed out of that plan with absolutely no theory about what to do afterwards, Iran has been continuing to do its malevolent acts all over the region, but it's now backstopped by centrifuges that are spinning nuclear material. So I think we're in a much weaker position with respect to Iran than we were when this president took over, just as we are with respect to Russia, just as we are with respect to North Korea and China. The guy can't find a foe that we have that he can stand up to.
Let's talk about 2020, because you're there in New Hampshire. And before we get to all the horse race questions, I want to ask you a question about one of your policies. Because one of the things that strikes me about you is your education push. So you have pledged to ensure equal access to high-quality programs, educational programs, as you put it, by 2028. You want all students to be able to read by 3rd grade, to be proficient in math and reading by 8th grade, and to graduate high school with the ability to earn a living wage. How do you do it? How do you pay for it?
I'm just so happy that you asked an education question that brings tears to my eyes, because we haven't had any conversation about it on the television in 2020. I hear about it every day in my town halls. And, you know, I'm the only school superintendent who's ever run for president, and I'm a lot more interested in free preschool than I am in free college. And as you mentioned, I believe we need to focus on the 70% of kids who are graduating from high school but not going to college, to make sure that when they leave high school, they can earn a living wage and that they're not consigned to the minimum wage. We can do that by transforming the way high school and community college works in this country. And I've shown how I'll pay for my plan, which would be $50 billion a year over the next 10 years. That investment would transform the lives of millions of Americans and transform the American economy. It would make education the wind beneath our wings again in this country, which it needs to be.
You said something that you're more invested in free pre-K than free college. Unpack that for us, because one of the reasons why Democratic candidates talk about free college is because they want college-age students to vote for them. Why is free pre-K in your mind more important?
I have to tell you that I think if preschool students voted, Geoff, we'd have a much more rational policy agenda that we're running on than the one we're running on. And what's clear, you know, if you ask any kindergarten teacher, they will tell you that if a kid comes to kindergarten not having had preschool and they live in poverty, they will have heard 30 million fewer words by the time they get to kindergarten than their more affluent peers. And that means they're going to start dropping out from the time they're in kindergarten. You know, people don't start dropping out in high school. They start dropping out in kindergarten when they're not ready. So an investment in preschool early I think, is a much more effective use of money and would mean much more to the kids that I used to work for in the Denver public schools, most of whom were kids of color and most of whom were kids living in poverty. And as I say, I think our agenda would be a lot more relevant if we were pandering to preschool kids than pandering to college kids.
Yeah, got to invest in those public schools. Okay, here's your horse race question. You say you want to finish in the top 3 in New Hampshire's primary. How do you do it? And if you don't do it, what happens?
Well, I'm planning on doing it, so I'll leave the answer to the second question for afterwards. But I've been in New Hampshire more than any other candidate. I've already done something like 50 town halls, and I'm on the way to doing another 50 town halls. We were just up in Hopkinton with my family on a New Year's hike with the people there, and I'm just going to earn this in the retail way that New Hampshire sometimes lets politicians do it, by answering every question, taking all the criticism that people have. People in New Hampshire have not made up their minds. They are looking for the candidate that can beat Donald Trump, and I think I am that candidate.
Senator Michael Bennet, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. Great to see you, sir.
Great to see you. Anybody who wants to help, go to michaelbennet.com.
All right, thanks for watching on this first day of 2020.